Hi everyone. I was just reading my book called Masters of Effects. Welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi, Hugo.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing? All good, all good. As you can see, and I am underwater right now.
Oh.
I am on the way of water. I am ready.
Some great spectral rendering there going on. I think that looks fantastic. Wow. Nice work, Hugo.
Welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Action VFX and ftrack. Action VFX has the best library of VFX stock footage, with over 5,500 high-quality elements. They are the best stock footage I ever come across, and I highly recommend them. And the new free for subscribers features allows you to instantly unlock over 1,000 free bonus assets for only $29 a month. Sign up at actionvfx.com today and start downloading. This podcast is also sponsored by ftrack. ftrack Review is the all-in-one collaborative workspace where you and your team can give and receive interactive feedback on projects in real time. Forget endless email threads, comments on the wrong version, or constant video calls. ftrack Review replaces all of that with a seamless back and forth. Simply add your media, share your link, and you and your teammates and clients can review from anywhere in the world in real-time, frame-accurate sync. You can also scale up to full production management with ftrack Studio. Start your free trial today at ftrack.com. And now on to the show.
Wow. I love it. I love it. I wish, as I always say, I wish I had a space like yours. But that's so cool. I don't think we've ever seen that view before on the VFX Notes podcast. You obviously do that with your stream.
I do it, yeah, I do it. I even have my little CRT monitor over there. Look at that for my gaming, my retro gaming. No, I know. I know. I don't know why I don't switch to this angle. I don't know. I never really. Unbelievable, isn't it? We've done 40 episodes now. We haven't done this yet. It's always been there, the camera. So
great to see you. And I think by now people might realize we're talking about Avatar: The Way of Water this episode. But before we jump into it, I really want to make sure we give a shout out to a few people here. The biggest hand at the moment goes to our sponsors. I don't think we'd be able to do VFX Notes without them, so thank you so much. The second biggest hand is to our Patreon supporters. And Hugo, I don't think we'd be able to do the VFX Notes podcast without them either. No. But also, they get a special thing, which is they get early access to the podcast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much to all the sponsors, all the Patreons. It's because of all of you that we actually get to do this and to put out these episodes every 2 weeks. And yeah, we're so happy. Thank you so much for everyone, for all the support and all the lovely messages as well. We always get a lot of lovely messages, a lot of comments, a lot of nice feedback. It's great to see people enjoying the show.
Yes, thank you so much to everyone watching on YouTube and also listening on the podcast. We really appreciate it. But we always make sure to give a shout out to our supporters. So thank you. Meanwhile, it looks like Hugo's come out of underwater, although it's still a bit blue there,
sorry.
Hugo. Oh, no, he's back.
I'm back to underwater. I know. I can do this all day.
Hugo, let's dive in, literally, to the phenomenon that is Avatar: The Way of Water. This is such a huge project that I also feel like we have to say, even though we're going to be talking about the visual effects and the virtual production and the shooting of it, we might miss bits out. We might get the name of tools wrong. We might just miss certain people. We're sorry, but it's such a huge production, right? It's impossible to talk about everything.
Yeah, it's gigantic. I feel like they've been doing it for 10 years, probably close to that, since the first records of this is that they're starting concept art in 2013. So this is way too big, too many people involved. amazing artists involved. So yeah, forgive me if we're gonna skip anything. Otherwise this will be an episode as long as the film, and we can't really do that.
We wouldn't put that on anybody. Although interestingly you say that, because I sent a podcast that I did to someone the other day and it was only 30 minutes. And they said, I wanted it to be longer. I'm getting used to listening to 3.5-hour podcasts. And I was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
But that does exist, totally. I know it does.
No, it does. Like my favorite podcast, which is a gaming podcast, it's called Last Stand. It's usually between 4 to 6 hours each episode.
Oh, my God.
And I just leave it on the background. It doesn't have any images. It's just sound. It's just, people are, you can see they're talking heads. But it's a wonderful podcast. I really recommend it if people like gaming. Last Stand is really good.
Awesome. Hugo, we always start with a review of the film. You went to see this. I imagine you've seen it a couple of times. Give me your reaction, because that's what the first takeaway is of any film like this, is the experience and the reaction to it.
Yeah, I've seen it 3 times now. I've seen the film in IMAX 3D first. That was the first experience. Second experience was in 2D, 48 frames per second. Because they did not have a 3D version in 48. I don't know if it exists, but at least in the cinemas I went, I couldn't find it. I emailed the cinema chain. It was really a struggle to find the 48 FPS version, because most of the people, when I called on the cinema chain, they didn't even know what I was talking about. So 40, high frame rate, what is that? So they didn't, but I did find it. And then I saw it the third time, this time on the Visual Effects Society screener, which is just an HD stream that you watch on the TV. So let me just I'll be quick. So I really want to hear what you think as well. So the whole thing with this is, the first time I saw it on 3D on IMAX, it was breathtaking. I was blown away by this thing. It was an experience. I was not expecting it. Let me put it this way, like, we all know Avatar in 2009 was a big thing. Everyone loved it. Everyone was blown away by it. I had no expectations like that. I thought it was going to be okay. I thought, it's no way it's going to be as good. No way it's going to blow me away. It's impossible. How could it be? And then I left the cinema like, what the hell just happened? I don't think I've ever seen anything so big and so photoreal. Got some shots. I was looking at the screen, and I was like, "What is going on?" Some of the stuff on this film is so photoreal and so ahead of its time that I don't think I've had an experience like this in a long time. Regardless, I'm not even talking about the film itself, like the story and I enjoyed the story. I thought the film was good, and I thought it was probably as good as the first one. I know it's divisive. A lot of people don't like the story and don't like the way that the film, but not even talking about that. As an experience for me, it was a bit transcending, especially the water parts. I was just in this universe, and I was just watching this entire section that people criticize so much, which is like an hour of water scenes. It is almost like relaxing. It's almost like you're basically just on a trance watching these scenes. It's just beautiful. That's how I felt. I felt like I was having an experience. Wasn't really watching a film. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, a bit like the first Avatar. It is much more an experience than some sort of fantastic film. Now, I've seen it twice. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's my thing with films. It doesn't have to be the greatest story or some emotional arc, that really resonates with me. It's the experience. I saw it in 3D in South Korea, and then in 2D at a suburban cinema in Australia. Yeah. Both times were quite different, especially because the audience was different. The second time, there were a lot more kids and teenagers who loved it. Their takeaway, they really connected with the kid characters. Yeah, and I think that is absolutely deliberate by Jim Cameron to have that in there. They loved that so much more than I even realized they would love. So they associated themselves with those kids. But you're right, Hugo. I was watching it in 3D and then watching it in the 2D version, and I just still... I've talked to Weta, and I've seen breakdowns galore, and I still don't know how they did it. So obviously we're going to talk about that side, but you can't help not watch this. You can't help but, while watching this film, wonder how they did it.
Yeah.
Which may or may not take you out of the film.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting like that.
It is. It absolutely is. We'll talk about that thing with the kids. I think I had the similar experience as well, because the second time I watched it in 2D, I had a lot more teenagers on the room. I'm guessing because the IMAX version is more expensive, maybe not everyone went to see it. But it's a lot more expensive, by the way, which is a shame, because it's the best way to experience the film. But I think I really wanted to tell this to everyone, because I know a lot of people are criticizing the film, and a lot of people are not enjoying. Especially, you know how it is, Twitter, the noise on YouTube. Mm-hmm. There's always people complaining about anything. But I really wanted to say to everyone listening, regardless if you think it's a good film, Avatar, the first one, regardless if you think this story is good or not, or if you hate it, it doesn't really matter. I really think you should go to the cinema to watch it, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I felt like when I was watching it in 3D and IMAX, if you can come in to the film and not even think about all the other negativities thing, if you just come in and just watch it, just sit down and watch it, it is a mind-blowing experience, because if you just let it go and just watch these images, it is so relaxing, and it's such a beautiful film to experience. And I really want people to leave their negativity behind and just go and just experience it on the cinema, because I was going to say, I watched this in 2D on the screener on HD. It is not the same. It doesn't even come close. It is so flat in terms of watching it in 2D on a regular TV. I don't even imagine what it is to watch it on a monitor, like on a computer or even on a phone. It does not have any impact whatsoever when you're watching it small. It's one of those films, it's just like Top Gun when we talked about it. It's one of those films you want to watch on the biggest screen you can find, and you're going to get a lot more out of it if you watch it really big,
I love that you have said a couple of times that it's relaxing. Hugo, that last 20 minutes is not relaxing.
No. I'm talking about the 1 hour in the middle. That's what I mean.
Yeah. I will say this, that having seen it twice now, the second time I was waiting for them to get to the water. Yeah. Meaning it is the best part of the film, and the earlier stuff back in the forest is all necessary, but it just feels like this film accelerates and excels once they get to the new location. And of course the final battle is just like almost a perfect James Cameron masterclass in filmmaking.
It's really those three things, isn't it? You're right. Like there's three, for me, there's three key moments on the film. It's the biblical beginning, which is amazing. This entire almost inferno hellscape. It's just like, it's such a dramatic and such a scary moment, almost like a nuclear explosion went off there. It's probably the biggest ecological message I've ever seen in like 10 minutes. It is incredible how James Cameron is really capturing this on this film, even more the first one. That biblical scene, then the water scene, the entire water coming of age teenager moment, and then the end, which is, like you said, a Terminator / Alien / Titanic film, action-packed to the brim, and it's really good action as well. So it's really these three acts, really, that really make this film amazing, and it's I like it a lot, and I can't wait to see the next. And it's gonna be 2 years until we watch the next one. God damn it, Jim.
I'm gonna say here though, there might be two things that I wish the film had excelled at. Yeah. With all those things that you just mentioned, I totally loved, especially the beginning and then the final battle, where I just am totally into it. I know where I am. It's incredible filmmaking. I didn't feel like, spoiler here, there's a death of a character. I sort of felt like the filmmakers, i.e. Jim Cameron, was trying to create a very emotional moment. I have to say, and talking to the people I've seen the film with, it's emotional because the character dies, but it actually didn't seem to resonate in the way that I think it might have been intended.
Yeah.
That's just me. I bet there's people who have cried and people who have felt like, oh, wow, that's, of course, devastating and sad. That point didn't land for me. What about you, Hugo?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It didn't land for me as well. But I think there is a thing here, because I've spoken with people that have kids and it landed for them. I think it lands different with people with family like that. You know, I just feel like it really, because I noticed talking with some people that people actually mentioned that scene as a really devastating part for them.
You're probably absolutely right about that. Okay, Hugo, my only other bugbear with the film, and it really is just one little thing, but I feel like I couldn't get past it, especially the second time I watched the film. They're all attacking the ship, and that includes Jake's family, and it includes the Metcaina, right? And they're all on animals. And there's this battle that happens, and it includes the other whale, Paikan, who does that very heroic thing. And then at some point, we don't see them again for the entire battle. Paikan comes back to help them get up to the surface, but definitely the Metcaina.
They went for lunch, for dinner, I guess.
Now, what I read the other day was that James Cameron had cut out heaps of gun violence in the film. And I just wonder whether he just went, well, we know that they were battling, and now we've got to concentrate on Jake, Sully, and family. Yeah. So let's just show them what's happening there. But it's a weird kind of plot point that he's no longer getting help from the, his friends, basically, his family. What do you think?
It's funny that you're saying that, because I really did not know. I didn't notice at all the first time I saw it at all. Yeah. Didn't even thought about that the first time. And I really noticed it on the second time. When I was watching the second time, I was on the cinema, like watching, and where are them? Like, why aren't they helping? I really thought that through while I was watching. It really put me out of the scene when I realized where the hell are them. But the first time, didn't notice at all. I'm assuming it's what you said. Like James Cameron has come out publicly saying that he doesn't want to support gun violence anymore, and he probably, there's rumors that there was like a 5-hour cut and a 4-hour cut, and all sorts of rumors that the film was even larger. And so, and I understand what he did. Like, it is really to focus on the family, but it could have worked to have a few scenes here and there. I think it could have worked. Maybe if they would have been more, maybe they would have been more destroyed, or maybe they were fighting somewhere else. Maybe if you had like the fight somewhere else, or maybe in the background you had more fighting, that could have worked, I think. But I also think that James Cameron probably is looking. I'm feeling that this is going to be like Two Towers, as opposed to the first Lord of the Rings, where the big battle is going to be on the next one. I feel like, because we don't have a big battle, there is no point in the film where we have all the troops fighting. These are just a few troops.
But there is a big fight with the boats get thrown around.
Saw how many troops they had. It was an entire city, and if they all attack, this would have been a complete warfare level thing. Yes. They probably had like 20 more of these ships, and they probably had 20 more helicopters, and probably thousands of troops.
That's true.
This probably will all end up on the 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or whatever. It's going to end up probably with a huge fight with all the tribes of Avatar against all the human fighters. That's, unless he doesn't do that because he's now trying to not have...
That's just one little point if we had to pull something out of the film. Yeah.
No, the film is really strong, and I don't really have. I mean, there are some little things here and there. I've seen entire videos on YouTube trying to destroy the plot here and there. I don't think that's even necessary. Like I said, I think the film is an experience, and the film should be watched experienced and enjoyed. You shouldn't really be like, I don't think it's like Top Gun. It's something to watch, and it's not to have a philosophical discussion. Although I do feel that this film has an enormous ecological message, just like the first one, which I love, and I feel like it's great that we see filmmakers tackling these kind of problems like whale hunting and the devastation of the forest. And you can clearly see these echoes of what's happening in mankind on our Earth as well on this film. And it's so smart and so intelligent to do it on another planet, where we basically go there and do exactly the same thing as we did on the planet where we're living 100 years later. And I find that fascinating, and that I find that's the strongest plot. I know people focus on the family and Sully and this and that, but the strongest part of the film for me is the ecological message and the whole thing as a whole. And I think that's, so I don't have really a lot of negatives. Now, there is one thing I must say. Since you brought up a few negative things, I'm going to say one thing, and it's not really about the film itself. It's about the way the film is being played. I find it incredibly confusing, this thing with the HD R version, and sorry, the high frame rate version, and then the 2D version, and then the 3D version, and the IMAX version, the IMAX 3D version, and the 2D version. There's at least 5 versions of this film, and it's very confusing. And the cinemas are not helping. They do not label these versions correctly. You go to the cinema, maybe you'll get one, maybe you'll get another. They're really doing a terrible job at this. For example, on the UK, there is no mention of the high frame rate version ever, anywhere. No one even talks about it. But there are cinemas broadcasting it randomly. It's really bonkers. And I really feel that this is... I remember a time where, for example, Stanley Kubrick had a lot of power over the cinema chains, and he could force them to play back films on a certain ratio, a certain aspect. He did that famously. He did that with Eyes Wide Shut by having actual instructions to the projectionists of how that film should be specifically projected and how big the frame cut should be. I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect here, and the experience of some people might not be the best one because of that, which is a shame, you know.
It's probably true, although clearly you're talking about an infrastructure problem where IMAX 3D exists, and then 2D film might be the only thing that a suburban cinema has, or 2D DCPs. You know, I think maybe there's a bunch of filmmakers, James Cameron, you know, Ang Lee, a few others who have adopted stereo and high frame rate, that maybe thought by now there'd be more projectors out there, more cinemas capable of handling it. It's clearly not the case.
No, not at all.
So
the IMAX, the IMAX in the UK don't have that. And I guess this is a good segue to talk about the first thing that I really think we could talk, which is the high frame rate version. I really hated the high frame rate version. The reason I hated it is not because of it itself, because I thought, let me do this. If the entire film was 48, I think I would have enjoyed it. And if the entire film was 24, I think I would have enjoyed it. I hated the cutting. It was horrible. It was really horrible to watch a scene in 24, intercut with 48, and then intercut with 24, and then back to 48 again during a battle or during the section. I have no idea why this was done. I think they should have done it just like, you know, Christopher Nolan does this famously on Dunkirk and on Batman, and also on other films that he's done, where he cuts between IMAX and 35, but he clearly makes the entire sequence, and then he cuts to the next sequence. Yeah. And I feel that this was a missed opportunity. I think the 48 version should have been the water thing, and then the rest should have been 24. Maybe that would have worked really nicely. It would have even been cool if it had 24 outside, and as soon as they go in the water, it becomes 48. It would have been beautiful, I think. It would have been a much better, smoother experience, I think.
I've struggled a little bit, Hugo, finding a story or super quotes from Jim Cameron on this. If people are watching and they have one, please send it in. There was a screening he went to in Busan in South Korea, but in October of last year, where he talked about what approach the 24 and 48 would have. And that was more about some sort of special cheat. But he did mention about when it would play like that, the emotional reason for it. Or, hey, I realize audiences don't like in just a dialogue scene for it to be 48 frames because they think it looks like a soap opera and not cinema. But it wasn't super clear when it was happening and when it wasn't. And I haven't found like a really great explanation of it.
But didn't it take it out? Wasn't it noticeable for you? It was very noticeable when it cut in between.
I just wondered whether it was all part of, these filmmakers, Hugo, they want it to be a cinema experience.
Yeah.
And you're saying you didn't have a great one in that regard for that reason, although you love the film. I just wonder whether it was almost a bit of experimentation, A, and B, by making it a bit unusual and different, you kind of had just that experience in the cinema.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to at home on your TV.
Which I think also, like, I don't think a lot of people will care much, and especially because of the younger audience. I mean, the younger audiences all play games at 60, all of them. Some of them even play games at 120. Because when you're playing a video game, you need to have that input response. You need to have as fast frame rate as possible, because then you can use your reflexes to try to win the game. And so that makes sense why it's 60 or above. And I think this entire generation is used to that frame rate high. And I don't think they'll care. They will just enjoy it because it's like a game. It looks just like as good as a game. In fact, I've seen people really complaining that films are 24, young people, because they're so used to now watching games. And so they actually don't like the 24 because it looks too jarring for them, and it struggles with them. And I think it's because they're used to this,
Oh, but I totally agree.
Yeah, but I want to definitely the best version for me is definitely the IMAX 3D. But what I would say is there is one really, I don't know if this was because of my cinema. There's something going on the beginning of the film though. There were, and I did this with the glasses, putting them in and on. There are several shots on the beginning sequence that are not on 3D. They switch from out of 3D into 2D and then 3D again. And I have no idea why this happened. Man, I'm not joking. Like several shots on the beginning, on this entire intro sequence of hell, especially the Pandora sequence when we see just the forests, which are not in 3D. And when I took out the glasses and put them back again, they were not on 3D, those shots. And I don't know what's going on there. And so there's, again, I don't know if this is technical issues of the cinema. I don't know, or if it's something going on. But that's what I was criticizing. There's a lot of technical aspects on this film. And it's a bit like Ang Lee, this war film he made with 120. I'm not even talking about Junior, not even talking about the Will Smith film, but the other one he had, I can't remember the name. That one was also 3D 120, and no one managed to watch it. No one watched that version. And so there's definitely a technical hurdle here, not really allowing us to experience these films as they should. And I can understand cinema chains probably don't have the money to buy millions of dollars of new projectors, and I understand that. But it's a gripe. I had a bit of a technical gripe around this thing,
Yeah. Well, of course, as we're recording this, people went and saw the film. It's made $2 billion, and I think
in a month.
Yeah,
Jesus.
I think you're kind of right in summing up that we care. But not everyone cares about it, and they still take away an amazing experience. Which, remember, this is what people said in 2009. That's the best cinema experience I've had for a while. And back then, they kind of meant the stereo.
Yeah.
As well as great visual effects work. But now there's sort of other things going on, especially the high frame rate and just the how much the image just pings. I mean, that is something we'll talk about with the water shots as well.
Oh yeah. This people are really, really, really enjoying it. I mean, like you said, James Cameron is now the only director in the world that has 3 films grossing over $2 billion. He has 3 of them, which is insane. Avatar 1, Avatar 2, and Titanic. He's now going to he's almost passing Avengers, and I'm expecting this to become third or second place because at the rate that it's going, It probably won't pass the first Avatar, but this is really big numbers. And it's funny for all the criticism that everyone was. I remember when the first trailers came out, everyone. It really shows you how small Twitter is. Everyone was saying, "Oh, what is Avatar? No one cares, and it's not culturally important. No one wants to see it." And then everyone went to see it anyway. I really think that this resonates with something that people on Twitter, it's just such a small community, don't really realize. People love James Cameron. They love his films. They really loved Avatar. And I think it's a moment. We talked about this on the first podcast we did about Avatar, which you can go and watch now, if you want. We talked about this. He is now, I'm not saying he's the same. He's not Kubrick, and Kubrick is not Cameron. I'm not comparing them. They're very different. But this is similar to Stanley Kubrick. People went to see a Stanley Kubrick film, regardless of what it was. And I think we've reached that point with Cameron. People go and see it. It doesn't matter what he's going to make. They're going to go and see it. That's the star power that he has on this moment. And you saw the proof that everyone went to see it. Like, I regardless of the cultural impact. I know we don't have any toys about Avatar. We don't have any serious video games. There's no TV shows. There's not an entire channel dedicated to it like Disney has, but it has some cultural impact for sure, because otherwise no one would go. Like no one would care, and everyone cared. So, well, yeah.
Yeah, just to briefly talk about that before we jump into a few of the technical aspects of the film, I think people do see a lot of Avatar, especially in the States, and part of that is the Pandora world at the Disney theme parks. There are toys. I mean, I've seen them. They're pretty cool. I wouldn't mind having some. Part of this was the Christmas release where there weren't necessarily huge other films around.
Yeah, it was the perfect slot.
It's just damn entertaining. And honestly, the 3.5 or not quite 3.5 hour running time never bothered me at all. No. Even though I say I wanted to jump to the water, I just, people like the movies for a movie experience, I think. And this is delivered, right? It's kind of like Top Gun, actually, in a way. Yeah. Top Gun is a great film, super entertaining, and has a lot of emotion and emotional arcs in it. But also, it's just so good in the cinema. It was just good.
You just want to watch that fighting. That's the thing. You just want to watch the flight scenes. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. It's like the water in Avatar. No, I didn't mean that it doesn't have to. Of course, it has toys, but I mean it's not at the same level as Star Wars. That's what I mean. Of course. It has made as much money as Star Wars. What I mean is like, and also like globally, the film has made most of its money on other territories and not the United States. It actually is not that big in the United States. It's only made $600 million, which is quite soft for compared with other films, blockbusters in the United States. Most of its money, it's on the world territories worldwide. And this is a typical thing from Cameron. He always has this effect, I think. But anyway, let's just get on with this because there's so many things to talk about. Where do we even start?
Well,
because this film is huge.
So Hugo, let's talk about the physical production of the film. One of the things that I think is really interesting is, of course, there was a live action shoot. There was performance capture shoot on a volume. There's also a shoot that happened in Los Angeles. There's shooting that happened in New Zealand. There's virtual camera shooting. There's a lot of different kinds of production on Way of Water. Someone we should mention is the DOP, Russell Carpenter, who worked with Cameron previously on Titanic.
And on True Lies as well.
Yeah, and True Lies, yeah. And was shooting here in terms of the live action with the Cameron Pace camera rig. Yeah. Kind of an adaptation of it, right, from the 2009 film.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Russell Carpenter, which I was a little bit shocked that it wasn't nominated for cinematography. I felt like that was a bit shocking. The same way I'm shocked about The Batman also not being nominated for cinematography. Those two were, for me, the biggest snobs of the nominations. But I understand it's only 5 and it's difficult sometimes to pick. But But yeah, he has a huge career. I mean, he's done some really, really amazing films, like you said, like Titanic. But he also has done some really action-packed films, like Hard Target with John Woo as well, and he's the DOP of Lawnmower Man as well, which we both love. I know,
Love it.
I love that film. Although I know the film is not that good, but it has a special part in my heart. That film. No, but yeah, this is I guess it's, I don't know if it's version 2. It's probably more versions than that, but it's kind of like an updated version of the camera pace rig, which we've talked about on the other episode that we did. This is basically two Sony advanced cameras with the mirror system and a lot newer things as well, especially these mounted cameras that were there. Especially, we're going to talk about that to develop some depth maps in real time. But yeah, it's there's not a lot of footage out there, so I won't show much. But we've seen some really extensive behind the scenes at the Visual Effects Society events, which has been nice. But yeah, I mean, this is just an iteration of what they did before. Again, real stereo filming. They did it for real in stereo, not converted later. And you notice on the film that they've tried to shoot as much as they could in practical. And I know that they've replaced most of it, probably 99% was replaced in CG. But there was this kind of really big methodology of shooting it with real sets, with grass, with the water, with actual fire on the set, with LEDs, with projections of fire. There's a lot of that on this film, isn't it? It's a very practical shoot. Yeah. Very, very practical, which is surprising, I guess, for most people. Most people think this is just a full CG film, but it doesn't really work that way when he's trying to film these films with James Cameron, so...
Agree. I think one of the most practical things that I was so surprised to learn about was this amazing, wave pool or tank created at Manhattan Beach Studios. I mean, that is insane. Basically, yes, they were shooting performance capture there above water and below water, but there's plenty of times in the film where they're either out kind of past the reef with waves, or they're in the midst of the attack with waves, and they felt they needed different types of practical water.
Yeah.
Because I guess we should say, Hugo, if people haven't really caught on, there's obviously the digital characters, and then there's a few live action characters, including the kid Spider.
Jesus.
So to accommodate that, we'll get to the process of how they did that soon.
Yeah.
But basically, they were filming wave tank stuff for Spider, but also they were filming performance captured actors in the wave tank.
Yeah.
To do different tides, swells, waves. And it was insane, right? They had these propellers from cruise ships running at 800 RPMs to do these currents.
I wish people could watch this featurette. There's this amazing featurette at the Visual Effects Society Awards for special effects, not for visual effects, for special effects. Showing this entire thing. It has it has 3 engines. It has 2 500 horsepower for making currents with these huge propellers at 800 RPM. And then it has the huge 800 horsepower wave machine, which is this gigantic wedge that goes up and down. If you turn all of it on, it's literally a tsunami that it can create. It is insane when it really goes for it. You saw the footage, it's so moving, that water. But it was an enormous... They say it can go to 30 knots inside the pool, which is a lot of speed, which is really, really moving them around. They had to have a lot of extensive training, of course, to film this thing. But I think, again, just like he did on the first film, all of this, of course, most of it was completely replaced in CG, but is so important for the R&D side of the film. They shot this back. They started shooting this in 2017. It's insane how they filmed this in 2017. So the film has been filmed almost 6 years ago now. The actors probably forgot how it was filmed by then because they probably did so many films after it. But it really addresses the fact that you now have basically a gigantic toy to play around to see the behavior of water. You don't have to go to a beach to see the references. You'll just make the machine move the water, and then you have this perfect reference of how waves develop, how they hit the bodies, how they all behave against a coastal line. It really helped the production, I think, and I think people will be surprised on the amount of, like I said, the amount of footage that was filmed, because I guess people forget that there's so many real humans in the middle of this film, much more than the first Avatar. In the first Avatar, we had a few here and there, and it was very, very few. But now we have entire sequences where we have 2-3 humans just walking around in the middle of the full CG scene, which is mind-blowing, really, to be honest, like in how it was achieved.
Yes, and I think what's also interesting is, and probably the most interesting thing about the film, Hugo, is the use of stuffies for some of this filming. Sorry.
I love it.
I only wanted to bring that up because in some of the behind-the-scenes footage we've seen, there's some great stand-in actors, or dummies, really, or, when characters are standing basically in walkers, they kind of have these extra stuffy limbs. I just wanted to bring it up. We probably don't have any footage of it, but
no, we don't.
So
cool. There is this really funny sequence where Spider is pulling the colonel, like when he's like at the end of the film, when he's like knocked out under the water, and he's taking the body up to the surface, and this was shot for real on the tank, where he's pulling a dummy, an oversized dummy of the Na'vi body. And it's a really articulated dummy, isn't it? It's really complex. It actually looks like one of these wood dolls that we have for drawing, like with the hands and everything. And it's really necessary, I guess, because then the actor could actually pull something and actually have the weight of it. Yeah. Obviously, they had to replace the entire thing in CG, but it's funny how it shows up all over the place. I don't know if I have footage to show it. I don't think it's public, but it's wonderful to see.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. Look, while we're talking about the live action shoot and its interaction with the CG work, there seem to me to be at least 2 things that this production did which aided so many other things. And what I mean is, it aided the filmmaking process, it aided actors, it aided the visual effects crew in actually producing the final shots. And all these usual things you do when you have to add CG creatures to live action, we know about those things, and we know about stuffies or, live comping on set or virtual production, simulcam stuff. There were 2 new things or basically evolutions of things that I really want to talk about. The first is that moving eyeline system, Hugo. Let's talk about that. The coolest thing about this is it looks like another creature or character on set, this thing they had, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really smart way of having an emotional connection between the actors, because they basically walk around with this stick. Sometimes it's a stick, sometimes it's attached to stuffies, which is basically one of these little small HD monitors from the set, the ones you usually attach to the cameras. And it has like some Bluetooth speakers for the voice, and they're basically playing the facial footage of the performance of the actor from the other shots. And so the facial camera rig that is pointing at the actor's face, which is a front view of the face, then this becomes a 2D image in this screen, and the screen is walking around at eye level for the actor to talk to. It's so smart. It is really smart, and I couldn't believe when I saw the behind the scenes. I was like, man, why didn't anyone else thought of this? This is so intelligent. Yeah. And I've never seen it before. I've never seen the use of it this way. And it makes so much sense, because I'm assuming the actor, he's looking at the face of the person, he's watching the emotional, although he's watching a footage with a lot of dots and everything, I know it's a bit distracting, but it must be a godsend for the actors to actually hear the voice, see the face and have it on the correct position for the eyes.
Yeah.
It just makes all the difference.
Yeah. And the thing to remember is the correct position is enabled because it's kind of like one of those sporting event spider cams that can be positioned any place on the set, which actually requires quite a lot of engineering. And as I understand it, it was a bit of a mix between engineering from Lightstorm Entertainment, the Third Floor, and Weta effects to make all this happen by jerry-rigging, something that already exists, something called a supercam. And then, pre-programming that with Maya moves, previs type moves, then actually, keeping track of what footage it would be in the first place, and then someone actually controlling it. So it's not like, it's a long way from a tennis ball on a stick, and it seems to have really helped with eye lines and actors.
I'm so sorry, and I know you love so much the tennis balls and the sticks, and I'm so sorry that now we have a technology. Maybe someone on set someday can put footage of a tennis ball inside one of these monitors just for you to have it.
Too much.
No, but on the behind the scenes of the visual effects side, you really see this really working, especially on this scene where Spider is in prison inside this room, this lab room, and he's talking with the Colonel. He's talking, and they're side, front to front. They're talking to each other. Spider is on the table. The Colonel is like trying to hold down because the room is so small, and you see this stick going on, and it just makes a huge difference. Obviously, there's also like a dude with the green spandex suit as well, walking around and actually touching Spider and actually putting him on the table and everything. That also happens on the shoot. The behind the scenes is really funny. It's a really funny version of the film, and I never really understand how actors can do these things without laughing their ass out when they're watching these things when they're actually on the set, because it's such an hilarious thing to see on the behind the scenes. No, but this is all part of this evolution that happened, because remember on the first one, we had this entire thing where he shot the whole mocap first, and then he later on filmed with a virtual camera the mocap that already existed. This is just another step. It's this mission statement that they talk about, where we want to make sure the director has everything on set so that it looks like everything is already there physically. So they look at the monitor, they see the CG. They look at this little small monitor, they see the other actor. Everything is there, just like we were shooting for real with the Navi in the actual room. And I find that this is really groundbreaking stuff. And I didn't mean to deviate the conversation, but this combined with the deep stuff that the system that they had on the cameras. For me personally, I think this is really the future of filmmaking for visual effects. They're basically putting the groundwork for this to be absolutely normal for us to use in the future. This is going to be completely normal, I think, because it's really groundbreaking. I feel like I was really shocked. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you're talking about another thing that I think done on set that then helped down the line continuously, almost to a surprising level, and that was building a depth extraction toolset for live compositing.
Yeah.
Again, because you've got these live action characters who have to interact with CG avatars or CG characters. Also, they're interacting with CG water effectively in the end. And so Weta FX built this depth extraction tool based on footage, stereo footage, I suppose, Hugo, from two cameras positioned on the main film camera.
Yeah, this is nothing new, of course. It's the old thing of like Apple and Steve Jobs picking everything to make one thing. Because, back in the day, 10 years ago, we had this depth extraction actually on our living room from Xbox. Xbox had the Kinect camera, which is a very similar setup. You had 2 cameras shooting a depth map, but of course that was a very rudimentary version of it 10 years ago. Now, 10 years forward, you have a lot more advanced GPU acceleration, so you can do a lot more detailed deep maps and depth compositing as well. And I feel that this is the most, well, there's so many impressive things on the visual effects in this film, of course, the water as well, and we're going to talk about that. But in terms of, let's put it this way, in terms of compositing, this is the most impressive compositing new feature that I've seen in a long, long, long time. They're basically extracting and having a deep depth pass. And then, because in the past, when you had CG characters, we all been on mocap shoots where we see it in real time on the screen. Yeah, we all been there. I've been on shoots where we can see it. But you never, when you have an actor in front, you can never have the actor in front of the CG. The actor is always behind. So when you're watching on the monitor, if someone is crossing, you don't really get the perspective because someone is then on top of who should be behind, and so this becomes a huge problem when you're trying to stage or trying to frame shots.
Because what has happened in the past, I think, Hugo, is that these extraction tools or live comp, slap comp things just do a quick, dirty job in some ways.
Yeah.
Here we're talking about a pixel accurate tool that allowed for proper occlusion, from those 2 cameras. And also the next step of that, why it worked so well, I think, is because of the introduction of some training data and AI tools. The training data side was so fascinating, isn't it? Because it relies on training from actual CG characters positioned on the set, depending on which set we're talking about, like sort of randomly, to sort of train what a person might look like so that you get this pixel accurate depth compositing.
Yeah, it's really smart because obviously they don't know yet where the camera will be staged, where it will be on the set until the day of shooting. So by training this system with a lot of positioning data from the scans of actors and also the 3D actual 3D scenes, it allowed the system to already kind of figure out where it might be occluding certain objects and where it would be occluding in certain parts of the set. And of course, they had the entire lidar scan of the sets themselves as well, also synced with the actual 3D sets that they've built as well. This is an enormous amount of work, of course, that needs to be done before everything is shot, of course, because they have to have this entire training data. They have to have all the CG already ready, kind of like at least in a place where you have a complete model build so that you can feed into the system. And then, of course, for it to play back in real time, you need to have something also in a good place.
Just remember, everyone, this is real time. Real time.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just saying it. Yes, it's because people kind of like it's like Unreal, like it's all real time. Well, it took years for it to be real time. That's the thing. Like this thing, yes, it's real time, but it wouldn't be any use if you didn't had the entire thing mock-tapped already, the entire CG characters done already, almost the entire animation done already, and already playing back on the screen. So this is why it took so many years, because it's years of work until the moment that they can actually shoot this. But I look at this, and I look at the papers, and I look at the behind the scenes that are at the Visual Effects Society and also at the SIGGRAPH papers. You can see some of this stuff as well. I look at this and I feel like, man, we are so close now to have a true, completely live compositing in real time in set, because this is as close as we got now. Obviously, it still has edge problems. It still has pixel issues. You still see glitches, and you still see some bad keying here and bad roto there. But this is just going to get better and better and better and better. And there will be a moment, maybe, I don't know if it's going to be 5 or 10 years, where we will be able to do real-time compositing live on camera, which is always been the dream of us, having complete extractions of alphas and in complete compositing in real time. James Cameron is now getting one step ahead on solving this problem with all this technology, and I feel it's really revolutionized the way they shot it, completely.
I guess also, just to be clear, it wasn't for the purpose of compositing. It was just so that it was so pixel accurate that Spider would be touching the CG character, the CG kernel,
where it should,
as an avatar, that they just knew where it lined up. And then down the track, I just imagine that really helped with the compositors, because it did actually matched up and didn't need to be fake so much. One really interesting thing in that behind the scenes footage we've seen, Hugo, was that this real-time depth compositing tool worked with dynamic surfaces like water. So they're in the wave pool, doing stuff for the live action shoot. And the real-time depth compositor was able to track the water surface at least. And I think they didn't really even think that would happen, but it just kind of worked when they pressed the button, which is really cool.
Which really helped for them to position, because obviously they had to redo the entire water and redo the whole thing later on in comp and in 3D and in CG, but at least it gives you already a pretty accurate position of where things would be anyway, as a point cloud and as a deep data inside the system. So I'm glad you've mentioned this. This is not replacing compositing whatsoever. This is just a way of you having real-time compositing on set so that you can see what you're doing. So that Spider is really the most impressive thing of this film, really. One of the most impressive things. Because he's walking around and he's touching the tiles and he's touching their faces and he's like moving around. And you don't even notice when you're watching, but you're like, oh, wait a minute. They're all CG. And the dude is a real guy, to a point that sometimes I was watching the film and I was like, did they make him in CG? Maybe he's CG as well.
Oh, Hugo, I was convinced. There's two moments where he is kind of arriving back with the family on a rock, during the battle, and they sort of get up onto the rock from the water surface. And then later, of course, he hauls the colonel up this rock. Yeah. And I was like, this is so good. I don't actually believe that live action actor is there or is a live action actor. And Weta FX is capable of doing a CG
we've seen Will
human.
Smith in CG. Of course. I understand what you mean, because you kind of thought, oh, maybe they shot him for real and then they just replaced him. It could have been that way. That would have been one way of doing it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would have worked, I'm sure.
It's just great work all round.
This is going to happen again when we talk about the actual CG water deep dated that they've made, the 3-way deep dated that I really want to talk about. But this comes back to one thing that I'm always remembering. As you know, I have a lot of students, and my students, they're young and they're always like, they're probably listening now, and they're always so concerned that, in the future there won't be any compositing. Oh, in the future we won't have any work to do, and this and that. There's so much compositing on this film that I don't even understand. Like, it's mind-blowing the amount of compositing happened in this film. Of course, the amount as well as the CG and simulations. I think, like this is just, again, one of those things where people get quite afraid of the high technology like AI and like these kind of training data. This is all going to help in the end. This is all just going to make compositing even easier and even better, and we can evolve for even better situations. And this film is the proof of that, because when you look at the film, all these little problems that we used to have relating to certain occlusions and reflections and refractions have been kind of solved, and they are solving it as we speak, and it will just make the tools even better so we can focus more in creative aspects of the compositing and CG of the shots. And I think this film is the testament of that. Embrace technology, everyone. That's what I'm always telling everyone. Like embrace it and adapt, so that you can do your work better. And that's exactly what Weta did here. I props for them, because I was already blown away by the Batman, and then they make this as well, and I'm like, what are they drinking on the water over there? What are they drinking in New Zealand? It must be something special, because I mean, it's nuts, this work.
Well, okay, that's a really good thing to say, because in terms of a note that I wanted to bring up, and we're going to segue into facial animation and Weta's water simulations work. But there is something special to say about Weta effects here, and that is the word physically plausible. Yeah. I feel like it's been Weta's goal since Gollum, if not before that. It's the goal of any visual effects studio, sure, but there is something about the way that Joe Letteri and Weta have concentrated on this concept of being physically plausible. Say, characters and creatures, building them from the inside out. They have had this tool called Tissue early on. Rendering. They've obviously built their own spectral renderer called Manuka. That's just the goal is, well, let's just do it as if it was real, as if it was real light. And then all this water stuff, and then we'll get to the facial animation. The goal seems to be, well, what happens in reality? Let's just reflect reality in the way that we build these things and do these things. And I think, when you've got a film like the first Avatar or these sequels, you actually have a vehicle
to go through them,
fulfill that goal, which is what Weta's done here.
But it's funny. It's really, so glad you've mentioned that. Yes, they do have a vehicle, but you've noticed that Weta has been doing this it's almost like you have a history here going through all these other films as well, because you look at Planet of the Apes, for example, when you look at the system that they've developed to make the trees age, not just make trees, but actually age the trees in the 3D system. And I'm sure that then helped the coral reefs and also the underwater and also the forests of Pandora as well coming from that system. You also then have the digital human side of things coming from Will Smith on Gemini Man, with the developments of skin, facial, and rigging. And then you kind of have all of this lens photorealism stuff on the lens on the Batman, where you have flares and you have like bouquets and you have, it's almost like Weta is now all of it is all coming together. They're building all these different systems for different types of films and for different types of things. And it's kind of, like you said, it's a vehicle. It's all started culminate on Avatar. By the time we're on Avatar 5, I don't even know, but it's probably going to be like something special, because this is now, it's getting there to a point where all of it is coming together from all these films. Just like you mentioned, all going back all the way to Gollum and to Lord of the Rings, where the amazing stuff that they've built there. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating to see the technology and advancements they've been doing over there. It's really cool.
And it never seems to stop, because in some ways, and here we'll talk about the facial animation system that they've implemented for Way of Water. In many ways, Weta pioneered the use of FACS. That's the facial action coding system. On King Kong and, then of course a whole range of other films, to basically replicate face shapes in digital humans and digital characters. Well, we get to Avatar: The Way of Water, and Joe Letteri and Weta say, FACS is good, but really it's just blend shapes, Hugo, and sometimes blend shapes, an actor might perform a shape that actually doesn't suit a blend shape, and so it doesn't look right as it transitions from one to the other. Also, the face model can go off model via blend shapes. So, okay, let's make a neural network relying on muscle strains instead of blend shapes. And actually, that's what they did here, right? Insane.
Why not?
Insane.
Yeah, why not? And it's really smart, because it's like reverse engineering, because they're shooting the actor with these dots and the 2 stereo rig camera on the face attached to the rig of the face. And that's making a depth pass for the face and then the dots for the tracking. And then that's reversed engineered. They basically pick that up and go all the way to the skin and then to the muscles and then to the bone and the cranium. It's like going all the way back to the interior of the actual anatomic of the body so that they can rig all those movements going through all these layers to the back and then go to the front again so that they can have the animation on the 3D system rig in Maya or on their system. When I see the behind the scenes, I see Maya's interface. I'm assuming it's built in top of Maya.
I think it is.
Yeah. So because I saw the shortcuts there, so this is really smart because then they've captured it, they've reverse engineered to actually attach it to the correct muscle and bone structure, and then it's going forward again because then they can have the performance but still have total control to change the performance completely if they need to with this kind of strain system and brush system that they just brush the little lip and brush the little eye.
Super cool.
It is absolutely insane, and I don't even know where you, and it sounds so normal, right? Oh yeah, of course we have a muscle system and a bone system, but the amount of R&D to make this work, it's really. I was already blown away by Fax, and I'm like, okay, Fax looks ancient now. Like,
yeah, I mean, Fax isn't Weta's system; it's just a thing that was used to talk about different facial shapes, and of course, Fax poses inside light stages and whatnot have become synonymous with doing digital humans. And actually, you mentioned it already, Hugo. Part of this is just an evolution of what Weta FX has always been doing, which is absolutely photoreal type animation based on real performances. You know, the animators extend the performances. But here, I think a really important thing, again, with the physically plausible side of it in mind, is they went for anatomically plausible, which means here's the range of motion Sigourney Weaver can do based on what we've looked at, and here's the range of motion from her performance capture. We will build a system that only replicates what she can do from her training data, from the data. But of course, they can shot sculpt if they need to. They can do extra things if they need to. But I was watching the facial animation a lot the second time, and it is true. You can sort of feel something even more believable this time around. Yeah, I feel, than the first film.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. It's a step beyond, and let's not forget the numbers are staggering. Because, you know, remember how we were blown away by Will Smith on Gemini Man? This is 20 Will Smiths, okay? It's 20 characters. Yes. It's not one, it's 20. And it's 3,000 facial performances. I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, let's just keep going. And I guess segue here would be for Sigourney Weaver. There's a lot of characters in this film. We can't talk about all of them, but it's really funny to see. I wanted to talk with you about Sigourney Weaver and Kiri because it's really fascinating how Kiri is a teenager and Sigourney Weaver is, of course, now I think she's on her late 50s. And she even talks about this on the interviews, how fun it was for her to behave and to act like a teenager. Funnily enough, she even went to schools to see teenagers these days to see how they behave.
Wait, Hugo, late 50s? Yeah. She's 73.
Really? I didn't know. Yeah. But she doesn't. Oh shit! She doesn't look like that.
No, she looks.
She doesn't look at all 70. I thought she was. I thought she was like 60 tops. I thought, because she's so young when she did Alien. So, but you're right. It's like 40 years ago. So this is just showing my age now. But now, but I guess that the funny thing about this is that she actually mentions this. She went to schools and she saw the performance of young people and tried to mimic that. And I think this is really, really a turning point because now with this entire system, they can have an older person acting and then actually transfer that to a younger model, and probably can do the vice versa as well. They can probably pick up a younger one to become an older one as well. This is really cool because the transition is seamless. They actually could, because they did all these tests. It's really fun to see the behind the scenes. They did all these tests where they actually tested shots from older Sigourney Weaver films, from films from the 70s and the 80s, and basically just like did a side-by-side performance test to match those films. And I guess that was the proof of concept to see that they could do this. And then they probably talked with Sigourney Weaver and James Cameron, and then they went for it. I think it's fascinating. What do you thought about that? The entire Sigourney Weaver performance and Curie and everything?
I thought it was really, really great. In terms of, it's just fun to have Sigourney Weaver in the film, and there's obviously a story point, which is the connection as the mother. I mean, obviously. Yeah. Sometimes I think I was just like, oh, I'm taken out of it a bit because it's Sigourney Weaver. But I've got to say, again, because I saw this film the second time with niece and nephews and teenagers, they really reacted strongly to that character. And when I told them that Sigourney Weaver was playing the character, they were fascinated because they said, wow, she really acted like a little girl or a teenage girl with the
amazing.
Facial looks and scowls and whatnot. And so whatever Weta did to capture that was just brilliant.
Yeah. She's an amazing actress. This really proves that. But isn't that, man, come on. You need to say this to John Letterio when you see him next time. Isn't this the biggest compliment you can give them? Like, it looks like Sigourney Weaver. Because it does. It looks exactly like Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
It is exactly like if you had Sigourney Weaver on makeup pretending to be an Avi when she was 16. You're right. You see, but it's not just with Sigourney Weaver. I can see all the other actors. I see Saldana as well on the other. I see them all of them. You can clearly even Kate as well. Like all of them are on that faces, and I think that's testament to the way that the performance was maintained.
Yeah,
it was really maintained from their original performance. You know.
Do you know what my reaction to it, Hugo, might be? Is that, as you say, there's 20 characters. The fact that Curie was so brilliant is kind of lost in the fact that all these characters are really well done, you know. So it's not lost. It's just that it's hard to pinpoint that.
I know
over
what you
others.
mean. I know it. They're all amazing. Kate Winslet is also amazing on the film as well. They are all amazing, and I feel again once again this film has some really strong performances. And I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like they overshadow each other because there's so many. Man, Stephen Lang is amazing on the film as well. And how old is he now? He's probably very old as well. Like, he's amazing on the film. I love Stephen Lang's character. I was so happy to see that he was back because he's one of the best villains ever. And I was like, oh, he's not going to be. And then he was there. It's amazing. Spoiler, everyone.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Maybe the only characters I didn't love were the captain of the big ship, who's an Australian actor, Brendan
Oh man,
Cowell.
I loved him. I thought he was great.
Well, he's a great actor, but I don't know why they had a weird Australian as the captain. And Jermaine Clennon as the good scientist. That's fun seeing him in there, but I don't know. It
was a bit weird. I know. Flight to the Conchords there. It's a bit. It was a very strange pick, but I think he did a good job. I felt that it was
quirky enough. Yeah, it was cool. All right, Hugo. Let's move on to another major part of this film, which is the water. And again, impossible to kind of cover everything that Weta FX has done here. But basically, they've used all this time, this production time on the film, possibly from 2017, to rebuild, add on to their existing water systems, and basically build a whole framework to allow multiple different types of water, which, is not a small undertaking at all.
No, and shout out to Weta for the fact that they're so open about it. They've actually published 8 papers on this. And so everything is out there. I guess everyone can kind of like join the fun because they're so open about it. And I feel like really congratulations to Weta by doing this. I love the fact that they're actually openly sending it to SIGGRAPH. There are actual papers that you can read. You can see all of this testing and R&D coming all the way back to 2017 by the Water Development Project. And it's amazing. But I guess they had to, because remember when we talked about the Top Gun has 2,200 shots? There are 2,200 water shots on this film. Okay? Not just shots, just water shots, only water shots.
Yeah.
It is insane, the amount of shots of water.
And just on the SIGGRAPH paper thing, when I wrote my article after talking to Weta about The Way of Water, I made a point of trying to link to as many of the SIGGRAPH papers that have been published over the years. And I think I only got 4, but of course, as you say, there's 8 or more. And, every time I'd go to SIGGRAPH, there'd be something on bubbles. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Or
Avatar.
Yeah, or thin fluids. Okay, I gotcha.
I know what you're doing.
Thin film, I mean. The funniest one, though, not to do with water, was about the facial animation. They had a paper at SIGGRAPH Asia in Korea last year. And actually, often these papers, they sort of have a name. And they actually gave the toolset this name called Anatomy, which is like anatomy. And I asked the Weta team about it, and they said, no, we never called our facial animation tool anything. That's the first time we've heard of it. And I thought that was really funny. They basically, it was like a code name that was never used. So that's really curious. But anyway, back to water. The interesting thing here, Hugo, again, is it's not just one thing. It's basically built on top of other things.
Yeah.
Weta uses Houdini, but they also have this framework called Loki.
Yeah.
And another tool called Pahi.
Yeah.
Which all seem to work in conjunction to do different types of water. So what are the different types of water, Hugo? We've got huge waves, cresting waves.
Yeah.
We've got water just dripping down characters' faces.
Droplets, entire droplet systems. Yep. Wet grooms for the wet. You notice how photoreal it looked now, the water wet, the hair, the wet. Especially Sully, he had like these rastas, and they were getting wet with droplets and everything, and it was like, wow, this is like another step. And then you have like also the foam as well. You also have liquids like blood and blood splatters as well. Yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. It's so much. It's so much stuff.
My most impressive things in terms of water, the things I was most impressed by, were the thin water coverings over characters. Either they just sort of wading in the shallows and would come up, and you would just see these. I was just
coming out,
yeah.
Exactly. When they went to the surface, right? Like it's I know what you mean.
And streaming water was, I guess, thin film water. Yeah. And then the second one was the combination of what must be a whole bunch of simulations, like when they're jumping into the reef and you get bubbles. I mean, we simulate bubbles. Weta simulated bubbles in other films. There was something about the combination of that, bubbles and water and the character and bubbles in their hair, all that sort of thing was so fantastic. And in some of the behind the scenes we've seen, like a major dance between the whale character and one of the other characters, Weta was able to simulate the water, bubbles, air, foam, all in one pass with this Loki state machine that they have. I mean, I'm not doing it justice to talk about it in this way because it's a huge project at the studio.
Yeah, it is. And I'm really glad you've mentioned that. That is the fascinating about it, because before, in the past, you would have to do all of these separate. You would have to do all of the simulation for one thing, and then for the other thing, and then for the other thing, and then maybe hope for the best that it would work all together, and then comp it. And they are actually being able to process the entire simulation in one go, not just the water, not just the droplets, but even the clothing and even the hair simulation, and also the necklaces and everything that is actually attached to these characters, all in one single humorous simulation, so that they all can interact and move from each other, so that the droplets move out next to the necklace, and then the necklace moves the bubbles, and then the bubbles touch the wave forces. This is really smart, but this was only possible really because they've basically nailed the fact that they could process this in multiple machines. In fact, when you start looking at some of the documents, apparently they've managed to split this, because that's always been one of the issues where when you're doing simulations, you can't split it. You have to do it in a single machine. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think I've read somewhere that they've managed to get it to at least 8 different instances to process one single simulation. I don't know if it's 8 or 6. I can't remember the number exactly from the paper, but this is a huge step, because then you can distribute processing, and not have one machine. Because then in the past you had to have a really beefed machine, but then there's a limit. You can't get the machine to be faster than the machine you can buy, the biggest one you can buy. But if you have 8, then at least you can have 8-fold, and then you can start having these kind of high simulations for the entire thing. It was all still split and rendered it separately and composited it together. It was all still composited. It doesn't come out of 3D like this, already made. A lot of people have that kind of misconception. It all is separated in AOVs and layers and all sorts of things for it to be combined again in compositing. But I think that was the step that they've managed to crack here. Yeah. And also together with GPU systems as well, to simulate when they were testing the thing, so they could have faster iterations. They could have actual GPU processing, so they can actually test and test and test instead of waiting for so long for the simulation to finish.
Yes, and I mean, I think it was on Tintin, but possibly earlier. Weta developed a GPU renderer called Gazebo. And then they also have Manuka, which is we were talking about before. And I wanted to quickly mention something about the underwater rendering of water. We've sort of talked about waves and splashes and whatnot. There was such a beautiful look to any underwater scenes as well, wasn't there? Yeah. Yeah. And, for there they had this sort of accurate spectral absorption going on. And basically just a really, really... something was happening with the rendering, compositing, the finaling of those shots, as I said before, that pinged. And I feel like, Hugo, you kept talking about the relaxation side of the movie. I could watch just those underwater reef scenes over and over again.
Yeah, so. No, I know what you mean. Because it's a combination of all of these things. Like you have, especially there is really beautiful moments that really, I was really shocked by them, which is when you have the surface and the water. You have the water line in the camera. This was really beautiful because you could see the underwater at the same time. You could see the sunny side of it as well. And then the water would go up and down, and sometimes cover the camera, and then sometimes not cover the camera. And there was just something fascinating and beautiful about this, because this is really complex. You have to render the sunny bit, because in the past, like, you had huge issues with this, because you have the sun hitting the characters on the surface of the water, and then of course the sun, as it hits the water, it gets dispersed in a different way from it's dispersed on the top. So yeah, you could have masks, but the problem with this is that, yeah, sure, you can have masks, but then you have depth of field, and then you have motion blur, and then you start having all sorts of issues with this. So they had to develop really complex systems to try to make sure they could still color correct and still composite this together. I'll give you an example. One of the coolest things is this kind of optical effect that they've created both in compositing and with the help of CG, of you having this kind of magnification happening when you're underwater. So as soon as you are outside, it's all clear, and then as you dive in, there's a lot of scenes where you dive into it, either in the beginning of the film, or even when they come out of the water when they're trying to breathe, or even on the end when they are stuck inside the sinking ship and they're just with the water on their neck, and then they go in. So they really nailed this kind of like compositing trick of doing actual real physical camera displacement and magnification when you're underwater. And then when it's above water, you get these droplets moving away from the lens and actually displacing in front of the glass all of the water that is still drying and coming down. This was a pivotal thing to make it so real, because it just looks exactly like the water, any documentary you see of real life water scenes. When you go and see David Attenborough's documentary, that's what you see. When the camera, because they've simulated not just the camera, they simulated a camera like the the underwater boxes, the housing, so they simulated the housing of the camera. And the actual reaction of the water scratching actually touching the glass of that housing. And I'm like, oh my God, what? It's insane. It is beautiful and insane, and it just looks so real. And this, I could talk about this for hours, and I don't want to do that. I'll talk about the deep data in a minute. So what do you thought about that? Because that was insane, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, I don't have anything to add to that, Hugo, but I was going to mention this deep data stuff where they've, basically had to split the world into 3 parts, sort of dry, reflected, and refracted, which meant that they could solve things like reflecting the world inside the water. In some ways doing that just to enable the shots to happen. But I think you've got more to say on that yourself, because you're a bit of you're geeking out on that one, Hugo.
I am, because this solves this solves the problem that we had for years. For years, one of the biggest issues when rendering refraction, especially when something is between glass or in the water, is that you can't control what's inside, because whatever is refracted has been displaced by the refraction, by the thickness of the glass or the thickness of the water. And so you always had all of this control with cryptomats and AOVs and all the different AOV passes for all of the compositing parts of the CG. But as soon as something was with glass or water, you couldn't touch anything, because nothing could be split inside the water. This was a huge problem for compositing, because then that meant, for example, I'll give an example. Imagine you want to do depth of field. So imagine you pick up the bokeh plugin from Nuke, and you try to do depth of field in 2D. And the problem is you get really nice depth of field on the 3D scene, but then anything that is underwater won't catch any depth of field, because for the depth map, it's an opaque object. It's like not transparent, it's opaque. So that means the depth map, it's black and white, and so there is no speed transparency inside of this map for you to have the focusing happening underwater as well. And this was a major turning point for them, because and this is for depth of field, but also for masks. If you want to mask something, you can mask the person to do color correction, but then the underwater part, especially when they're just in the surface and you have their bodies out, and you can mask that, but then the displacement part of the body, which is underwater, you can't mask it because it has all of this displacement from the water. So they solved that. And I was watching this behind the scenes. I was like, for fuck's sake, why didn't I have this before? Because you don't even imagine the amount of times that we had this issue in compositing, like when we are doing scenes. You don't even imagine the amount of times at the mill where we had to do major fakery to try to get even a mask to behave by basically doing colored masks with the displacement of water to try to get a mask there. So this entire idea of doing, we always talk about deep compositing as a great way of you merging volumetrics and waters and simulations, but they went even deeper there, I guess, sorry the pun. They did 3 of them. They didn't do just one, they did 3, because everything is bigger on this film, I guess. Let's just not have one. You know how much heavy it is to use one depth pass? I don't even imagine what this comp is with 3 depth passes. But so you have the regular depth pass, which is for you to have the regular CG, and then you have the point clouds for you to do the compositing. And then you have the depth pass of the reflection, so that you can deal with depth of field and masks on the reflection surface of the water. And then you have the depth map with the point cloud and the coordinates for the refraction, which is the reflection in the water. So then you can do masking and depth of field in 3 different instances. And this is why the film looks so good, okay? Because you could now have proper depth of field. Like, I'm talking about accurate depth of field that you see on film. If you go underwater and you film something, that's how it would look. This is exactly what's happening on this 3D system. And this solves so many problems. I can't wait for this to become mainstream. I am assuming someday this all will become mainstream, because that's how it always happens. You know, it always starts on one company, someone does a paper, and then suddenly 5 years down the line, this shows up on mainstream compositing applications and 3D applications. And this is really mind-blowing stuff. I am really not giving it justice. I'm sorry. I'm not, because when you see the breakdowns of this on the Visual Effects Society, when you see the depth of field breakdown, then you see any compositor that sees this like, oh my God, they've nailed it. They've solved it. And
wow.
Congratulations.
Luckily, yes.
Congratulations. Get the Oscar now. Where's the Oscar? I have the Oscar over there. Let me get it. Here it is. I have it here. Here it is for Weta. You can take it. Yeah, I already have it here. Okay.
Is it an Oscar for depth compositing?
The Oscar goes to Weta. Congratulations. You earned it.
Well, I mean, I'm lucky to do this podcast with a compositing expert who understands that much more than I do. But I agree. There's a reason it looks so great, and that is part of the reason. And Weta does have an amazing history in compositing and, you know, pretty much almost inventing deep compositing for Nuke, although that isn't quite true. There's a history of different people doing different things. So
they're going to be people complaining about that now.
But, you know, they had a huge hand in it. I just think, you know, we've definitely given a shout out to the compositors.
Oh, one thing I forgot about this one extra thing for all the geeks out there compositing. They didn't just separate these 3 depth passes. They also separated the AOVs, you know, the speculars, reflections, refractions. Per light, these trees, these Nuke scripts were probably big. We can assume that. It was really, really impressive.
All I wanted to say, Hugo, is that often with an Avatar film, the CG and the performance capture gets a lot of airtime, which it should. But I feel like here, compositors played a huge role in making the imagery appear as good as it does. And I'm so glad we've talked for quite a long time.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm geeking out about that. And I must say one thing, no disrespect to any other department, because I really feel truly, this is just my compositor brain talking, but I truly feel that this film was an achievement on every single department. You know, I feel like the amazing work on modeling, on rendering, on lighting, on simulations, and rigging, and 3D, and Nuke, and compositing. Everyone had a huge hand on this looking so good. I am not saying that this was completely done in comp. I did not say that. I'm just like mentioning highly detailed stuff that happened in comp, because that's my speciality. There is a ton of highly detailed things happening. And like I said in the beginning, we can't do a 6-hour podcast. We would be here forever because there's so much stuff. I mean, we could bring in an effects specialist and then he probably would geek out for an hour on these simulations that happen on the first 5 minutes of the film. You know, all that smoke, all that fire, all that water, all that vapor. It's like that entire apocalyptic scene is It's funny how that entire sequence on the beginning is as many visual effects as an entire movie usually has, you know. It's also, there's so much other stuff, you know.
And here's an interesting thing that I'm not sure everyone does know about some of those opening scenes, not all of them, but definitely the landing craft and the hand of God type thing and the fire and the animals running out of the forest. Those, of course, were done by ILM.
Yeah.
And as they had done on the first film, you know, Weta needed to concentrate on the water, the Na'vi, all this sort of stuff. So ILM came in and did a bunch of sequences, including those opening ones, the arrival of the manifest destinies in space, a couple of the scenes of Bridgehead, and a few other things, and did an awesome job, in my opinion, of matching the aesthetic of the film. Of course, what they took were Weta effects assets and environment builds, and were able to ingest those into their system. As I understand it, they've got a really great way of ingesting each other's assets these days, Weta and ILM, with a special tool, and turntabling them. That's why I feel like it doesn't look like something else. No. Sometimes in these huge other superhero films where lots of different studios are collaborating and they're all working on the same character, the truth is if you put them side by side, you can kind of sometimes tell, although they actually do a stellar job most of the time. Here I felt ILM did a great job of taking on some of Weta's shots and doing it that way. Especially the fire stuff. That was brilliant.
Jesus. Yeah, and I feel like it's also, of course, it's really smart that this is an entire self-contained scene, and so of course it is, even if it would look different, it doesn't really matter because it is a different thing altogether. It's a destruction apocalyptic scene, makes it doesn't connect at all with the water sequences in the middle of the film, so it could have, and it's also highly stylized. It is so bleak and so dark, and it's so powerful because the entire light source is only coming from these spaceships and from the fire. So it's just really this beautiful, beautiful sequence. Almost looks like the entire thing looks like a beautiful concept art that someone came up with. I love it, and it has a lot of trickery as well. They have beautiful systems of doing 3D haze, using 3D particles. They have a ton of really beautiful silhouetted volumes to try to make more dramatic scenes. They have a 3D lens flare tool that they've used as well to try to mimic as much as they could the anamorphic lenses of that beginning. That entire sequence is really, really spectacular. And there's a lot of simulations. And any of the film, this would probably be the only thing we would talk about because it is so impressive. It's that impressive. And we're only talking about it at the very end, like a side note.
Well,
I don't want to disrespect, but this film, man, we could spend the entire podcast, for example, talking about this beast, the sea beast, the ship. The ship alone is probably one of the sea dragon. This entire thing is 19 CG shots, 400 assets, 320 million polygons. It's like this thing is probably the biggest CG build that I've ever heard. And yeah, we're not even talking about it. We're talking now.
Well, incredible hard surface modeling and execution by Weta effects there. As were many of the smaller boats, when they're gone on the hunt. I thought there were some moments when those boats were going up and down in the crazy waves where I couldn't tell whether they had sort of shot something and then just replaced it. I thought that was very convincing, especially when they were crashing and doing things, and they seemed to have live action actors on it. But of course, they must have been digidoubles. I don't actually know because I'm not sure.
There is a couple of moments on the breakdowns where you see some of they had them build some of these boats. So I'm assuming they shot some of it and maybe ended up replacing most of it. But knowing how James Cameron operates, I'm assuming they shot the whole thing and had at least one real shot for everything and then just took over. The same thing with the ship as well. The Sea Dragon, although it's 19 CG shots, there's also a set for it where they can walk around and there's a section of the of the interior where they actually have it, and also even inside the bow as well, where all the command center is, where Spider is always sneaking out. That entire thing is a set as well with blue screen. I've seen some photos of that as well. I know, man. This is so big. We haven't even talked about the amazing modeling happening on the coral. There's like 100 species of corals and reefs that they've modeled on this thing. That entire thing is a world of itself. The entire modeling and atmosphere. We have also Pandora's Forest, which is much bigger this time. Like when you look at the whole thing that they've built there, the whole city. Remember the old one, the old city, which was like this little, now it looks quaint, it's like a little place with one spaceship and like some people coming in. This is an entire city that they've built with cars and transit and this and that.
Yeah.
That entire thing is a huge build as well. I can understand why it was 5 years to do. I mean, I understand that because... it started in 2014, the concept art. So that's 10 years that it took. But the actual shooting and modeling in 3D, that's like 5 years, 6 years of work. I understand why, because there's so much work here. I can't even imagine.
And I would only say that hopefully if sequels get made, then Weta's work and the production design work is all part of rolled up into future stuff. But
you say that... But they always keep replacing everything again, don't they? Look at what happens to fax. Like, get over that. Like, I can bet that they'll just make a completely new facial system and like, oh, here's the new one. Even better now. Even better than the last one.
Or maybe, Hugo, in 8 years when the last film was out, they just type a prompt into the AI generator and it's there. All right. I reckon... It's true. There is so much to talk about with this film, and I think we'll launch this podcast with a chat where we might even be able to add extra information. But I'm going to finish with one thing, Hugo, and maybe you can finish with one more observation. I was lucky enough to be in Los Angeles the other week for the Visual Effects Bake Off, where this film was obviously presented and is now a nominee. And I wanted to just share the audience reaction to a few things. The audience is visual effects professionals, people who've been around for 40 years, new VFX soups, VFX artists, and their guests, other filmmakers, Academy members. There were oohs and ahs in the audience, Hugo, when they showed some of those breakdowns with the cable cam eyeline system and the onset depth compositing. Especially with that moving wall of water. There were literally groans, in a good way, good groans. Yeah, that kind of thing. There were also the same kind of reaction happened when the Lightstorm VFX suit, Richard Bainham, talked about capturing above the water and below the water. And you might have seen those behind-the-scenes pictures where they had those white floating balls to sort of differentiate between the water surface. That's because above the water, they used the classic infrared motion capture cameras. Yeah. And below the water was ultraviolet light cameras. Yeah. They didn't know whether it would work, someone jumping from above the water to below the water or going the other way around with the two different kinds of light being used for capture. And again, they kind of pressed the button, did the performance, and apparently it worked first time. So that got a really big laugh in the audience. And I thought on this multi-million-dollar production, I just love that was something they were able to mention. But yeah, that's my sort of closing thought on the incredible visual effects and production of the film.
Yeah, and I know, man. We didn't even talk about that. Damn, no, it is. There are so many technical things that I'm sure we're gonna be talking for years and years to come. I wish I was on that audience. I'm assuming people really geeked out after talking about all those things, and I really sincerely hope that the behind the scenes and the breakdowns come out, because I feel like some of the stuff that I watched on the Visual Effects Society voting thing, I got floored by it, and I don't usually get floored by these kind of things. I was really blown away by some of these breakdowns. I don't normally do that, because normally, they are usually always the same. It's always the type of same things that you see breakdown. Okay, here's the blue screen, here's the LED wall, here's this. This was genuinely surprising to me to see all this new stuff. and it really inspires the new generation. It really inspired me to think of new ways of using it, and I'm sure it's inspiring all the other artists on that audience to go back to their own facilities and start making this stuff up as well, and collaborating with other things. And I thought this is really the biggest caveat of all this, is the collaboration aspect, and all these papers being published, and the way Weta is approaching this really has an open mind to inspire other companies and make other companies also do the same stuff. I love that. I love them for that, So that would be my final thoughts for that. But
I unfortunately have one more final thought.
Of course.
It was lucky that I got stuffies in there a couple of hours ago in this podcast. But Hugo, I cannot believe we didn't bring it up yet. But you know what I'm about to say.
Oh yeah, it's in caps lock on my notes.
I'm about to say the word straps.
Oh my God.
It's the thing that sent the internet into a frenzy.
Yep.
And I'm sure you can show the trailer footage while we're talking now.
Yeah. Of
basically Jake Sully strapping up a thing to hold on to his ilu, and it was in the trailer. He's bobbing up in the water. The strap is kind of in the water. His hands are touching the water. The internet was crazy. Went crazy. Is this real? Is this practical footage? Is it CG? Everyone seemed to get it wrong, didn't they, Hugo?
Yeah, of course.
I just to finish up on that, I sort of last minute emailed Weta FX's visual effects supervisor, Eric Sangden, for my story with a question about the strap shot, and he was very nice to answer it. But Hugo, how did they do it? Do you want to reveal to people how it was done?
Well, I guess everyone was right and they were wrong as well, because it wasn't just one thing. So some people thought it was full CG, me included. I thought it was full CG. And some people thought it was all real with someone painted, and it turns out it's both. It's someone painted with their hands painted with a real strap, some real water, some CG water, some real body, some CG body. And it's all mixed. So the hands themselves are real, but then the arms and the upper is CG. Mm-hmm. The water, the contact water is real, but then the water around it and extra water is CG. And it's just mind-blowing how you don't even notice the merging of these two things. This is how effective this new water system and rendering system is, where basically it's real and it's not real, and it's CG and it's not CG, and it's insane. And I love it, but I have one thing I must say about this scene. The film is 3 hours and 12 minutes long, and people are really getting caught up with this thing, because this is one shot on the 3,000 or 4,000 shots this film has. Clearly, like 99% of the film is with CG water. There's this shot, and I know people. It's like Top Gun. Oh my God, it's real. Yeah, sure, but it's so tiny and it's so small on this film, and it just goes back to how James Cameron operates. If you can do it for real, you do it for real. Christopher Nolan does the same. If we can do it for real, we do it for real. Obviously, we can't have the other shots for real. That's not going to happen. But this one worked. Let's go for it. Let's keep it. I completely understand why they did it. The same way when Spider is on the coastline and he's walking around with them and moving the coronal into the water, there is also some real water there mixed with the CG water. There's a few other shots where they've done that. They don't talk much about those shots, but there are a few of those where they ended up replacing the CG water, but also keeping some of it in little parts, and it's all kind of a mix. But it all comes down to the same attitude with Christopher Nolan, with Cameron, even with Top Gun. Shoot as much as you can for real, as much as you can, and then you take over from there. And I think that's the caveat for this shot. It's a beautiful shot, but it was funny how Twitter reacted for sure. Yeah. It was hilarious.
And you can imagine how it happened. The truth is, Weta would have worked on this for months because there's a lot of CG and compositing work. But to get the shot, as I understand it, they went, well, we're going to get the shot if we shoot it in the wading pool, in a kiddie's pool, with a stand-in for Sam Worthington. We'll get the shot, it'll be in the edit, right? And then you can work on it Weta effects.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. Yeah. So it's actually a clever way of getting the shot for the edit, I think, because it wasn't necessarily something they performance captured.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm really glad to have talked about that. And I'm sort of excited that it got fever pitch. That meant that Avatar actually got this kind of extra boost, at least from the geek VFX community, where it went nuts on Reddit and elsewhere.
These kind of things happen more often than people realize. It happens in commercials, it happens in films, it happens in cinematics. There are a lot of trickery going on with real stuff mixed with CG that sometimes people don't realize. I really want to make, everyone should have that attitude, because if you can make it for real and if you can shoot it for real as much as you can, it's always going to be a great beginning. And I think that's what happened on this shot. Why would they replace it in CG? Because it looks fine. It looks great. I couldn't tell that it was his hands were painted. I couldn't tell that it wasn't the real hands. I mean, it looks perfect.
Yeah. Well, and just to be super clear, it's like a combo of everything. Yeah. As are many shots in visual effects. So they've kind of done the right thing by having the real thing there as reference and then doing their CG magic on it. I would love
to see a breakdown on that shot, but there isn't any breakdown on that shot. That was a shame.
No.
I would have loved
to
see the original
special
plate.
Request.
Yeah, to see if we can see the real plate of that shoot. Maybe like 10 years from now, we'll see it on the 10-year anniversary Blu-ray that's going to come out.
All right, Hugo. Thank you for taking the time to give your expert analysis on the film, especially compositing wise. I'm so glad to have talked to you about this, and we'll see what happens with the Oscars. This clearly must be the front runner. But you never know with the Oscars sometimes, do you?
No, if this film doesn't win the Oscar for visual, it's here, by the way. If this film doesn't win
it's already
the Oscar,
won. Sorry,
it's already won.
It's already
here. I already given it to it. It's here. I know the Top Gun looks tempting. I know that, but man, come on. This film is 10 years of work. This film is... I know what you mean. We were talking about this offline. Like, there's always these kind of situations where a big production doesn't get the Oscar because something else comes along. And what did you say? Swooped it? Wasn't what you said. I am a little afraid that might happen with Top Gun. But if that happens, people are going to be really upset, especially after all of the drama that they've pretended that there was no CG in Top Gun. That is going to be even more tricky to handle as a Twitter storm when it wins and there's no CG. Why did it win? It's going to be dramatic, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Avatar, looking at the breakdowns, I think people get blown away by it, and the breakdowns of Top Gun are not that impressive, to be honest. Like, they're not. I don't think they hid it. They hid a lot of it. So they're not showing the whole picture of Top Gun at all on the breakdowns. So I think that's going to make a difference on the voting for sure, because breakdowns do make a difference, and showing it for real makes a huge difference.
Well, it's obviously all great work. The Avatar stuff is just, it's like, we saw the trailer and we knew it looked good. But when you watch the film, I didn't even realize it would be that good. That's how that's my takeaway from the film a bit. So, yeah. All right, we should wrap it up. Hugo, thank you so much again. Always fun to chat.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for listening.
Thank you. I might just go back and keep reading this book.
Yeah, and I'll stay here on the water.
Bye, everyone. See ya.
Bye.